Welcome back to Nattymuscleradio, where it's still all about natural bodybuilding. We are back this week with another excellent episode planned for you guys. I have one of my favorite natural bodybuilders of all time, someone who's been a big inspiration to me over the years, Mr. Irontron 3000 himself, Eric Scott. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm in Wisconsin. I'm in Milwaukee. It's snowy and it's cold, which is how it is about 10 months out of the year. So,
You know, I feel you, man. It's snowy and cold in Canada here as well, especially this last week. It's been crazy cold.
yeah, it's pretty cold now. It's like 3. I think that's actually warm, but we get used to it.
Yeah, we had some temperatures like I think it was minus like 24 Celsius with the wind chill this week. So it was a bundle up kind of week for sure. How's things going in Wisconsin with the COVID stuff? You guys have gyms open there?
Yes, we do. We have gyms open. We have to all follow the mask regulations and, stay within a certain distance, 6 feet from everyone. And for the most part, gyms around here will follow those guidelines. There's some people that won't wear masks, but there's only so much you can do about that. But
For sure.
We're trying. So
Awesome. So I just want to show people your Instagram first off, a screen share here, to kind of let people know who you are in case they haven't seen you. So this is Eric here, competing in natural bodybuilding for a long time, multiple natural pro in many federations. Also competed in the IFBB Arnold South Africa, I think it was in 2017. And just phenomenal top level natural physique that hasn't competed in a few years now, but is planning to make a comeback this year. So thought it would be a perfect time to grab him. Eric also as well, I'll include this. Eric coached me for a period of time in 2014. I definitely learned a lot from Eric during that time. So Eric, can you tell the listeners how you get started in bodybuilding?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started lifting weights when I would say about 14 years old. And my sister bought me I believe it was called a Gravitron. No, Octagym. That's what it was called. It was an Octagym. So it was a hydraulic based weight training system. And it only offered positive resistance. So there wasn't any negative resistance. So it was a rower. You could do upright rows, and you could do variations of benches with it. This was like something that was probably made in the early 70s. Remember doing it and liking how it felt. I didn't really know anything about bodybuilding back then, but I liked resistance training. Naturally, I'm a very, very thin guy. If I wasn't weight training, I'd probably be about 145, 150 pounds. And I'm about 6 feet tall. So that's pretty lean. So, I actually just started weight training because I just didn't like how I looked, which is probably a pretty common reason for a lot of guys. And then I tried that. And then obviously I grew out of the Octagym after about a year. And I bought a weight bench at a Walmart, and I think I was 15 or 16 at the time. I had my first job, and with my first check, I took my bike with a wagon attached to a Walmart, and I bought the bench, and I put the bench on the wagon and drove it back home about 4 miles. So I guess that would be probably my first biggest big excursion with really going the extra mile to get something done with bodybuilding. But yeah, I guess that's how it started. And in terms of actually competing, I was training at a gym when I was 18 years old, which was it was a bodybuilding gym. And the owner asked me if I'd ever consider doing a bodybuilding competition. And I really didn't even know too much about bodybuilding or competitions or what that really entailed. but I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. So I was probably, I think it was a freshman or sophomore in college. And the guidance that I received at the time was very non-science based, and it was like a lot of carb depletion and a lot of water depletion, things that, we talk about now and it's just asinine. But there were older guys that were part of the old school bodybuilding, and I believed them because it's what other option did I have? Didn't place. I did my routine for 20 seconds. And prior to the 20 seconds, I wasn't looking at the audience. I wasn't paying attention. I was just really focused on my routine. But then I saw everybody and I freaked out and I just like walked off stage. And I got off stage. I'm like, this is not me. Like, I can't, like, there's just no way I can't do this. And everyone agreed, really. They're like, Eric, you probably shouldn't do this ever again. You just didn't look like were in your element up there. So I didn't even think I was going to compete after that first show. And that was in 2005. Yeah, exactly. So that was when I had hair and it was great. And I always had it styled back like that. I was a big skateboarder, like even then. And and now I'm bald. So I could just look at that and reminisce, really.
I wish I had some old photos at hand here. Maybe I'll try and pepper them in as the episode goes on. But I remember seeing the pictures from your first show, and obviously the improvements you made over the years were absolutely like mind blowing.
Oh, thanks. It's been my main focus of my life, really.
So when you had that awkward first experience, what made you keep going there when it kind of felt wrong at first to be a competitive bodybuilder?
After that show, I really didn't think about bodybuilding or competitions at all for some time. And after that, I really began to wonder like why I didn't like it. Because I do like lifting weights. I've always loved lifting weights. And whether or not bodybuilding is in my life, like I'll always weight training. I like the way it feels. I don't like the way that my body feels when I'm weight training. I'm more susceptible to pain. Things just hurt. So especially as I get older, and resistance training will have to continue to be a big part of my life. But what brought me back were like everyone was saying that at that time in 2005, like this, you shouldn't do this. If this isn't for you. But then I like challenges like that. And I really began to reevaluate my physique, implement my own methods. My methods back then in 2005 were just, hearsay knowledge about how the body works. And, the body retains this or that when you do this or that, which, it's just nonsense. It's just pseudoscience. And I began to do my own research, and I got on the bodybuilding.com forums. Remember those? And I had a body space, which was awesome. And, I began following guys like Lane Norton and trying to think of some other names, but Lane Norton really stands out. And that was when Lane was, I think that's when Lane was living in Illinois, and I followed him a lot. And I loved the stuff that he was doing. And, this was before, Facebook and Instagram. And Facebook back then in 2008, 2009, which is when I actually began competing again, was in 2008. Facebook didn't develop into the huge social media monster that it is now. It just, back then when you had Facebook, it was like something that was attached to that you use if you had a university email, and like you wouldn't post things about, bodybuilding. You would say, I am in a happy mood today, like stuff like that. It isn't what it is now, which is a lot of it's, it's used a lot for marketing. But I began to, find my own method with dieting. I began, tracking my food, not on just like a notepad with a piece of paper and a pen. I began using, MyFitnessPal or some other, I think it was MyFitnessPal at that time. But because I've been using the app for years and years and years, I've been tracking my weight and my food for, I would guess, about 10 years on it. But I just began developing my own method, and I realized the reason why my experience for the first time I competed was just that I really didn't feel like I had control over how the show went and how my appearance, because I didn't really know what I was doing. When I began to educate myself more on the method I wanted to use and began refining my techniques with my food, and then in the off season with my food, and how I wanted to build my body a specific way, I felt more independent about it, and I liked it much more.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, when you first get on stage, you're so just like out there, and I think people are very similar in the way that they have a poor experience their first show, because so many things can just go wrong because you have no idea what's going to happen the first time you do a diet, and lots of people will do their first show without even dieting down before, and it just makes for a world of bad outcomes for many people, I think.
Absolutely, and that's I prep competitors maybe a few a year. I don't like taking on tons of competitors, because when I do, it requires a lot of focus on my part, because I want them to have a good experience. Because a lot of people that come to me and my business partner are people that have had horrible experiences with coaches. So a lot of what we're doing is uneducating them. Like, yeah, you can chew gum for this reason. You can drink coffee for this reason. We try to give them science-based answers, because I don't want to have everyone to have. I want everyone to have a good experience with bodybuilding, and especially when you find yourself a good community, which I would like. That's the reason I love National Bodybuilding so much, because we're such a close community. Everyone knows everybody. That it's really going to help your experiences flourish.
So you made pretty steady progress in the sport, at least from what I can tell, from like 20. I haven't seen many pictures from maybe 2008, but from 2011 to maybe 2017, you seem to like kind of climb your way through the ranks. What was your top placing in the IFPA when you were competing as a pro with them?
In 2013, I did the Kansas City Pro International. That was a big show. That used to be such a big show. That was when Fred Rowlett and his wife's show in Kansas City. I think I took fourth at that show. There were 15, 16 guys in my class, and it was like, I could talk so much about these shows. I remember backstage, and there's like guys in my class, like Martin Daniels, Robert Johnson, like Chris Asuga from UK, and I'm like, I'll be fine, no big deal. And that's, and I love doing that show for a multitude of reasons. But I got fourth. It was just stacked, and that's when I started talking to the Yanamasis, Paul Yanamasi Jr. I actually started talking to Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. after that show, because I beat their dad, and they weren't too happy about that. And then I just started talking to them after the show, and actually I went to New York, and I hung out with them a couple of times. I judged one of their shows. Great family, great guys. Probably like the coolest father-son duo in bodybuilding that I've ever met. They're just a cool group to be around. They love bodybuilding. They do anything for the sport. I remember, forgive me if I'm going on tangents, because I don't really ever talk about this stuff.
Okay.
But I remember being in Paul Sr.'s basement with Paul Yanamasi Jr. And we were filming a documentary. And I was at this point in my career when I thought being 240 and just a total amoeba was awesome. And I was just fat. There could have been some muscle tone somewhere, but I just looked like a overstuffed pillowcase. And we were like filming in the basement, talking about our bodybuilding endeavors up to that point. And this is like, each of us had probably done maybe like 6-7 shows, nothing crazy. And I remember his father like ran downstairs because they run a couple shows a year in New York. And one of the trophies or two of the trophies had broken when they were being shipped, and Paul Sr. was panicking because they weren't going to have a trophy for one of the winners. So Paul Sr. has competed in like 1,000 shows. Like the guy just like, he's just the sultan of natural bodybuilding. And he goes and he has all the trophies in the basement. They're not up in display or anything like that. They're just like sitting in a corner. Like it's just, there's like hundreds of them. And he just grabs one of the trophies and just like, he's like, oh, this one will do just fine. Like, and the guy just gives one of the competitors one of the trophies. Like, just the most selfless guy I've ever met in my life. I'm thinking to myself, like, man, I'd never do that. Like, that's just crazy. But that just shows like how much he loves the sport.
Yeah. That must have been the peak of your Jurassic bulking days then.
Oh, that was bad. That was rough. Yeah, that was rough. It shows that more isn't always better. So
I think it's interesting though. You kind of makes for some good humorous Facebook statuses over the years, which I've definitely enjoyed. But I think it's interesting your approach, because like to me, like you're someone who's kind of like my height, and probably I'm gonna assume you're like kind of bigger frame because just your stage weight's been so much higher than mine. But you have put on like a ton of size over the years, and like you're up there with some of the like most impressive physiques in natural bodybuilding. And I'm kind of curious, like with your bulking strategy or like periods of calorie surplus, like I feel like that must have played some sort of role in like you getting to where you are now.
Yeah. I haven't really done a lot of shows. I think I've done like 15 or 16 shows, but the way that I would structure my shows is that I would do 3 or 4 shows in a row, then I'd be gone for like 3 or 4 years. And I think what a lot of competitors tend to do is that, they'll compete spring, and then they'll compete in the fall. Like, guys that really aren't seasoned because they want to get their pro card, they want to do well, or they're not giving their body ample time to recover. And with me, I've always I'll do a show and I'll really just look at my body as objectively as I can, and say like, I need this versus this. And I guess it's just that reassessment over time, but my calves will probably always be small. So
that's right. I remember the hour-long calf routine you had me do.
Yeah, it was a bit egregious. Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, but like how my training has evolved through many stages of my life. Now I train for longevity more than anything. I make preventative exercise a pretty big role in what I do. If I'm doing something that's shoulder oriented, or something that involves the shoulder complex, I'm doing rotator cuff movements, I'm doing mobility movements. I do a significant amount of banded work, whether it's for upper body or whether it's for my hip complex. So I'm making sure that I'm mobile, making sure that I'm loose. I want to, my goal is to be able to keep on doing this as long as I possibly can. And I don't want to be one of those bodybuilders that have short-lived career, and people are always wondering, I wonder what happened to Eric Scott. Oh, he's just so injured he can't compete anymore. Because I've seen that a lot, and it makes me sad, because a lot of guys tend to burn the wick at both ends and aren't really to take advantage of their genetic potential because they're so oft injured. But I guess it really just being objective about how my body looks, and looking at my priorities and what I need versus what I don't need. And just really trying to evolve as I get older as well.
Do you think, eating at the big surplus, was it all detrimental to you, or do you think there were some benefits to it?
You don't need, as everyone knows, you don't need to be 3,000 calories above your maintenance calorie to put on muscle. When I was, how your body moves is going to change if you're 230 pounds versus being a semi-lean, 205 in the off season. What I noticed about being heavier was that it was just, it's common issues with being heavier. It was just strain on my knees. It was just my body isn't meant to be 230 pounds. It's just, and that's one of the many reasons why I never wanted to do drugs, because it was, to me, it's just not sustainable. Like, I would never want to be 330 pounds in the off season. Like, I can't, like I'm not naturally a very big eater as it is. And I couldn't imagine having to try to maintain that type of body weight. It just wouldn't be enjoyable for me anymore.
Right.
But it definitely is detrimental to a certain point. Like, it just, at heart, like, I like being a fat kid. Like, I love putting eggnog in with my protein shakes. Will it give you diarrhea? Yeah. Is it fun when you do it? Absolutely. But there comes a point, especially as I've gotten older, that the margin for error gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Like, my form has to be immaculate. My mobility and stretching routines have to be on every single day. I need to make sure that, I'm on, just my regimen on, like, supplement wise, I take a lot of, I'm thinking not a lot, but supplements for joint support. It's just things that as I get older, I can't forget to do, just like I never would go into like a push workout or a pull workout without doing some sort of preventative protocol prior to doing that. So I feel like I'm sometimes overly cautious because I just don't want to be injured. Like, I don't want to be that guy that's, reaching back in a cabinet for something and then, tears one of his rotator cuff muscles. So I guess I just appreciate the progress that I've made, and I want to make sure that I can sustain that as long as I can.
So how long, starting off a workout, would you spend on like mobility and preventative exercises?
It really would depend on what I'm doing. My split now, a split that I've always found to be really successful was, and this was, years and years ago, I fell upon it when I was following Layton Norton, was the power hypertrophy adaptive training. I've been doing variations of that for years. But if I have a power day, I'm probably dedicating, I would say, about 20 minutes, 25 minutes just to that. I never feel like I'm wasting time when I warm up too much. I always feel better when I'm warm, especially, tendons, which have, are notorious for not having tons of vascularity. I like having my tendons warm. I'll roll out my tendons quite a bit. Tendonitis is something that like a lot of lifters will get. I want to make sure to keep that at bay, make sure that when I'm not developing any regular movement patterns when I press or when I pull or doing any sort of leg movement. So I'm just very cognizant of where my body is positioned in every appropriate plane.
Got it. So just swinging things back to your competitive career now, like you were doing really well in the IFPA, and you decided to switch things up in 2017 and compete in the IFBB. And actually, people will confuse classic physique and classic bodybuilding, but I believe you did classic bodybuilding that year. I'm just wondering, like, what led to the decision to go that route, and how was the experience with it?
I could talk days about just the experiences. Okay, so I didn't know, this is the funny thing, is not so funny in the moment when it happened, but I didn't know that there was a difference between classic physique and classic bodybuilding. So we can get to that in a second, but how I decided to change was that, so 2013, I did the Kansas City Pro Show and I took fourth, and I was hoping to get, when I did the Orton Cup that year, hoping to get top 5, but that was a rough year because the peak week of the Orton Cup, like my mother died in the beginning of peak week, and I don't know what, people talk about having a difficult peak week. That's when a peak week gets difficult. So it was unexpected, and I actually got the news when I was driving back from Ohio from a guest posing that I did in Newark. And I think it really just puts things in perspective. When I did the show, I was just worn out emotionally. I did it, but it was just, I felt more robotic and I wasn't entirely passionate about it. But after that show, I just really began to, I really just put bodybuilding in a hold for a little bit. Didn't really think too much about it. And really just began to reconsider what I wanted to do. But so fast forward to 2016, is that I was looking at, and that's when I kind of made a decision, is that I went to a lot of shows that year natural pro shows, natural amateur shows. And I realized that the landscape of natural bodybuilding in 2013 up to 2013, from 2013 to 2016, was changing. Like the shows became, and this is the story that everyone knows, like the shows were becoming less competitive. Natural, there were more categories. When I began competing years ago, there was just bodybuilding, then there was classic physique, then there was this, and there was that. Then there was regular physique, the men's physique class, the board shorts type thing. And regular bodybuilding just became less competitive. And I felt that if I would compete in 2017 within the natural federations, that it just wouldn't be the same competitively. And a lot of the guys I competed with weren't competing, or they were disinterested in competing, or they were just disenchanted with competing, or they didn't feel like it was going anywhere, or they wanted to focus on their career. It was a lot of those different things. And I felt the same way. And when I went to the shows, like the pro shows that I went to, I wasn't really excited about it. Like I've never done shows because I wanted to just win first place. I would do a show, when I would compete, I would do the most difficult shows that I felt I could participate in that competitive season. Like I chose Kansas City Pro, not because I wanted to, just get a trophy, because I looked at the guys that were competing in this. I'm like, this is insane. I want to jump into this and see what happens. And I did that, when I turned pro in 2009, I did the show that in the Midwest, I was most competitive, which was the OCB Midwest State Show. And that was a great show. I love that show. I love Ray that runs that show. And, back then when I did it, there were 20 some guys in my class. And, the feeling of accomplishment of doing that show versus, doing in a class of two, I would have so much of a greater sense of accomplishment. And that's how I've kind of been with every show. It's like, I want to do this show because I'm going to feel better because of this way. So when 2016 really didn't give me a good feeling about, projecting 2017, NPC came out with the classic physique category. And at that time, I looked at, and this is when it first started, bear in mind, there was, you had your height, and you had a corresponding weight cutoff, and the weight cutoff for classic physique for my height at that time, I think it was like 194, 195. And I generally competed the same weight. It's probably less because I don't have hair anymore, but it's usually around like 188, 190 pounds, depending on where I am with water that day.
Yeah.
It just really depends, So, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, so this is a new category. The shorts look kind of weird, but whatever. This is something that, as a seasoned natural competitor, this is something that I feel that, we could do really well at. And like I talked to other natural pros, and, they were just kind of lukewarm about it. Like, oh, NPC, I don't know. And a lot of guys were like that. Yeah, that's the show. Yeah. So that was at the first show that I did. That was the 2016 NPC Noble Classic. And I believe that was in Rockford. So I was under the impression that it was being marketed to natural competitors to get, natural bodybuilders into the ranks of NPC. That's what I had thought at the time. So, I began to think, I'm like, okay, in 2009, when I won my national pro card at the OCB Midwest State Show, I remember sitting backstage between prejudging and finals, and I was just obsessively running through my pose routine in the back room while everyone was gone. And I was just like, in my mind, like winning that pro card was like, I would have done anything just to win that show. And, I really thought about how I felt in that moment, years ago when it happened. And I I didn't really look at it as a risk back then, because like if I, let's say I get rid of my National Pro card, I do an NPC show, I suck, I could just get it back again. It's just like, it wasn't as competitive anymore anyway. Like it just, I felt that I was taking a calculated risk, and, if anything, why not? Why not do it? So I did do it, and I did that show, and I won the overall. And, honestly, that was probably the best I'd looked in, so I did that show, and I was backstage, and it wasn't uber competitive. So I really just ate freely that morning, took a lot of sodium, took a lot of water. The guys were great in my class, loved them, great sportsmen. But I just kind of did, ate quite a bit of food that morning, and I wasn't nervous like I typically would be. And that's probably the best I'd looked in quite some time. But so I won that show, and Kevin Noble, the guy that ran the show, is a great guy. And I was really, and that was actually polygraphed, because it was, it's marketed as a natural NPC show. And that was probably the most rigorous polygraph test I'd ever had in my life.
Oh, wow.
It was
interesting.
Yeah. Right. It was 45 minutes, and the guy was just crazy about the questions he was asking. So I wasn't anticipating that, but I passed it, obviously, because I did the show. But like I was, really, it was more arduous than the natural bodybuilding polygraphs that I'd had. But so anyway, I did that show, and the main reason I did that show was because I knew that if I did well at that show, that I could potentially do the Arnold Classics. And, this was something like in 2016, I was thinking like, yeah, in my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do the Arnold Classics. That's gonna be great. But to me, it seemed like it's such an insane idea, because then when I looked at all the stats, like, this is just crazy. This is, like you don't know how well you're gonna do in, competition that you're not really accustomed to doing.
So after that, you won that overall. Was the next stop for you the Arnold Classic, and was that all the same year as well?
So that was fall 2016. So when I won that overall, I put in my registration for the Arnold Classic, and I'm looking at the registration form, and I see classic bodybuilding. I'm thinking in my head, classic bodybuilding, classic physique is probably the same thing. For me, I've always been really, for me, it's all about preparation, making sure I'm at the same right place at the right time. Like my time, like it just, I would never make a mistake like that ever. So I'm back. So fast forward to I'm backstage in Ohio. That was in South Africa. And I'm backstage, and there's this other guy that who did natural shows too, and we're both wearing the same like classic physique trunks. And there's all these European guys, huge guys, and just regular bodybuilding bikinis. And I go to the guy, and I forgot what his name was. I think it was Anthony, but he's from California, I knew that for a fact. And I'm looking at all these guys, and I'm pumping up next to him. And I said to Anthony, like, I'm really glad I'm not competing with these guys. These guys are fucking huge. He's like, these guys are in your class. I'm like, what? And I'm like, and I go, I'm like, no, I'm in classic physique. It's like, no, this is classic bodybuilding. It's like, this is a European division. Like, we're competing against those guys in the corner. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Then he explained to me the difference of like this is classic physique, classic bodybuilding is just regular bodybuilding in the IFBB. And I'm like, this sucks. So I'm backstage, and obviously like the anxiety at that time is pretty high. And I'm standing there with the classic physique, and he goes, with classic physique shorts, and he goes, just roll it down, and just roll it up enough so it resembles a trunk in some way. And so I did that, and there were a lot of guys in that class too. I'm not sure exactly how many, it was years ago, but I took 5th in that class. I probably would have placed a bit higher if I was wearing the appropriate trunks. But it's just my body just looked so different from all those guys.
Can I jump in just for a second and clarify?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
Where I grew up, we had the local like untested shows here, and they always had the classic bodybuilding division, even though it was never popular anywhere else. But I just want to clarify that it was like bodybuilding judged exactly as bodybuilding, same poses, but just a height weight cutoff. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Yep. So
And I think it might have been like a more strict like cutoff than what they have in classic physique now. Like it might have been like for my height, it might have been closer to like 185 maybe for weight or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I was not familiar with that at all because a category like that was never in the USA.
Yeah.
So it's just like when someone is explaining this to me backstage and I'm sitting there with these bicycle shorts on, I'm like, are you kidding? I would always have a bikini or like a bodybuilding bikini with me. And like, that was the one time in my life that I didn't bring something like that with. And yeah, but I was completely unfamiliar with that. I felt like an idiot. But after that I took fifth and but after that, I began to, educate myself on IFBB International. And I realized that there was, the classic bodybuilding and classic games bodybuilding, which is actually a category in the Pan Am Games. And that's ultimately what I wanted to do. So like when on Facebook, I would be posting about, the Pan Am Games and bodybuilding. And like the information just wasn't out there. So people would probably be reading my post and like, is he insane? Like, is there, for me, ultimately the goal was to be competing in the Pan Am Games and classic bodybuilding because, it's not difficult for me to, stay within that weight limit. And I loved that possibility. And I fell in love with that idea for a long time until I realized it just wasn't going to be happening. But
well, I did actually, and I apologize to this guy Jorge, and also the people who I told I do the show with. But I did an interview with Jorge, who did the one rendition I think they had of it in the Pan Am Games. But I don't think they continued it after that year. It was 2018, I think.
It's so sad because that was my goal, to do that. For me, doing the Arnold Classics. In Ohio, then Africa, then Spain, to me, that was my, Olympics, because, especially at Spain, which was that probably was the most ridiculous competition. It just thousands of competitors. But, you had a representative from every country. It just felt like more of that Olympic feel to it. And that's what I absolutely love. And that's where I really wanted it to go. But, I realized ultimately that the whole journey with what I was doing was something that, was for me alone and no one, it was no one's obligation to jump in with it. So.
Right. So once you did your competing with the IFBB and realized that the Pan Am Games probably wasn't going to be a possibility, did that kind of make you lose interest in the IFBB track?
Well, I could talk all day about this. Sorry that my Great Dane had a coaster in his mouth, so cut that out. So you knew about the split between IFBB International and NPC, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so the way that it worked is, so I did the Noble show and I won the overall. Then I did Ohio, it took fifth. I did South Africa, took fourth. South Africa was amazing. I have so much footage of that stuff, of that show that I have so much footage of that show that I never put out. And it was sad because I knew that the journey was going to end, but what made it difficult with the NPC is that after Spain, I mean, actually, was it before Spain a little bit or afterwards? There was the split between IFBB and IFBB International and NPC, and it just wasn't going to happen because ultimately I wanted to do worlds after that, because there was a classic bodybuilding world competition, and it's like, God, so many competitors. Like it was like the way that it was explained to me in South Africa, and one of the judges that that would be judging that show, he's like, there's like 100 classic bodybuilders, they're all top notch, there's no audience, it's just the judges, and like it was just exactly what I had wanted, like high competition, high expectations, professional. Like I was just falling in love with the idea of like doing something like that. But that split happened, and I'm like, so I'm this solitary competitor from the US, and I'm kind of dangling up there, and the NPC doesn't want me to compete in international.
Yeah.
And obviously I want to be doing worlds, and I contacted someone from the NPC. I won't say who it was, but I contacted someone for the NPC, and I'm like, hey, I want to do worlds, because this person had allowed me to compete in South Africa, and I also, when I competed in Ohio and in Spain, and I said I want to do this show, and basically he said no, and I said why not, and there was no response, and I contacted IFBB International in Barcelona directly, and I didn't get a response until probably a few weeks later, and they were like, yeah, you could absolutely compete now. And then by that time, though, this is like 2 weeks before the show, and I'm like depressed and like eating just crap. Like I'm just like in like full just like bloat mode. I'm looking at my body like there's no way I can compete like this. And that was entirely my fault. It just I just thought I would be done for the year, because there was like the road was done. But after that, what happened was IFBB International collaborated with a new federation called IFBB Physique America. And this was a federation that was headed by Wayne D'Amelia. And he called me saying, like, we're going to do this. They're going to be the chairman for Wisconsin. We're going to get the bodybuilding and the Pan Am Games, this and that. And it just never went anywhere. I was part of that for a short time. There was no direction. The leadership was extremely poor at best. And like, it just kind of fizzled out. So, and that's kind of when that whole journey ended.
So how did you feel after that, with all like the kind of bickering amongst the federations and the confusion and the not knowing, like after that situation was over, how did you feel mentally about, just competing in bodybuilding in general?
I became, honestly, I just didn't really want to compete ever again. I feel that a lot of federations don't keep the interests of the competitors in mind. And I feel like a lot of federations, not just into NPC, but a lot of federations in general, don't look at the competitor's best interests. Ultimately, we're all doing this for specific reasons, and the reasons are our own. I love bodybuilding because I love the challenge. I love the solidarity of the community of natural bodybuilders. I love being able to push my body, and I really love trying to perfect the form of what I do. I've always, aside from that, one time in 2005, like I love being on stage, and I love making presentation for me, as artistic as I can. So I really just fell in love with that as I developed as an athlete. But after IFBB, after that fizzled out, like I really just was trying to figure out like why I wanted to compete again. So
I think, you know what, but there's been more than a few people over the years just kind of get kind of burnt out, because it's like, they love bodybuilding, they love the stage, they love everything that goes into it, but then kind of the bickering and the politics between federations just really turns them off, like solidly. Like I think that happens more than people realize.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, at the end of the day, we're professional natural athletes that aren't being paid to do this. You know, it's not like we have salaries. It's not like we have health insurance or PTs that we're working with, or, you know, to help our bodies improve. Like, we're doing everything ourselves, down to our diet, down to our training. Like, we're in control of everything, you know. So trying to restrict the athlete to not do this versus do that, like, you know, why? You know, it just,
Yeah,
I think it's just,
it feels like you're being so limited, like, and it just feels like, you know, if you don't stay with the same federation the whole time, like, you can't really have any options. It's like, even this happened to like Lee Priest. Like, he tried to go to a different federation when he was in IFBB and he got fined, right? It's been happening
yeah.
through the history of bodybuilding for years.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's just like, that's what happens. You try to exhibit control over another person.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. But and then after that, I went to a few IMBA shows, PNBA, Leif Anderson shows. I like what they're doing, specifically in collaboration with Ironman magazine, and because this is a natural bodybuilding magazine now. I feel like as a natural competitor, it's fun. You know, I think it would be fun. I saw footage of the Natural Olympia and being in Vegas, and like, for me, it's, if I'm not having fun doing it, like, I just don't, you know, what's the point? I feel like has the potential to be a lot of fun. And I feel that it's a good group of people, and the competition is obviously very high, but we'll see how my body holds up with all that.
Absolutely. How's your training been going lately, Eric?
Good. I do a lot of preventative exercise, like I said before. I do, you know, as I've gotten older, like, you know, as when we were younger, we could train heavy all the time, or felt like we could. So I do, you know, I do DUP. So I do I change my weights, I change my reps. I do deloads every 8 weeks. You know, it just things that, you know, as an aging lifter, are a bigger priority. I have fun, you know, I have fun when I train, and just like doing shows, it just, I enjoy training a lot more. And I did enjoy training a lot more the past few years, because I'm disciplined enough to, like, if I don't have a goal show in mind, it doesn't mean I'm working hard. Like, I bust it in the gym every day, but like, I'm never, you know, being lax about how I do things. I'm always trying to refine things as much as I possibly can. Yep. That's me wearing a hat because I'm bald. So, you know, but I'm always like, I follow a lot of physical therapists and exercise physiologists. I really don't follow many bodybuilders. I don't really spend tons of time on social media anymore. That's a good Penley row. But, you know, for me, I try to spend my time gathering information that's going to increase the longevity of my career. That's me lifting in a sweater like I usually do. But yeah, I do I have a power. So I do power hypertrophy adapter training. So I'll have lower reps, power more, just it's a pretty standard routine, like I was talking about before. But I take a lot of care in making sure that my body is performing well. And I'm like, I don't jerk weights around. I'm just, for me, just, you know, the discipline with form is just such a huge priority.
Absolutely. So I'm hoping we can round out the show with some of your classic Facebook posts and just kind of elaborate on them a little bit, to give people some insights into your thoughts and feelings around stuff. So here's what I always liked: trust the process. Unless the process is insane, then question it.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
How'd you come up with that one?
Experiencing a lot of bad coaches in the industry. You know, when I would have an athlete from a bad coach come to me and they would try to explain to me why they did certain things, and I'd always ask them, like, why did you, you know, not, like, why were you not chewing gum, or why were you not drinking coffee? And then there was never an answer, like, well, they never told me why. And then I would always say, well, you should always ask why you're doing something. because a lot of those people have issues with food because of these non-science-based ideas. So that's when I kind of started. I think that day was probably, I met somebody and like it was just the things that were in the diet. It was just like not diet like 90% tilapia, and I'm like, so like a fun time to me. So,
well, I think it's an interesting quote because it has like a good purpose behind it. Like someone maybe you're coaching someone and they're like stressing on all the minutia, and they're just being like, well, I was down, half a pound this week, and I feel like I'm losing muscle and I'm flat. And then as a coach, you can be like, well, you have to be at a deficit. You have to trust the process. You know what I mean? You have to let the
yeah.
process take its course. But it can also be a double-edged sword. Like if you're using that to justify like some pretty insane practices like you're talking about, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Like rubbing preparation H all over your body and wrapping yourself in cellophane and hoping you're going to wake up dry in the morning.
did you hear this? Did people say that? Did coaches do
No,
that?
no, I just made that up on the fly, but yeah, not that insane, but things pretty close to that. Yeah.
All right, let's do the next one.
Yeah.
Someone offering a contest prep service after competing in one show makes as much sense as thinking you're capable of performing surgery after playing the board game Operation.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I don't, sometimes I'm a funny guy. I like that one. That was good. That's pretty good.
Go ahead.
I haven't like when you send me that over email, and I'm like I hadn't heard that quote in a long time. That was pretty good, and that's I think that was at a time when there was all this influx of coaches, and I've judged a lot of shows in the past, and like I would when I do these shows, these athletes would send me a friend request on Facebook or whatever social media platform, and then I would and they didn't do particularly well in the show. They didn't look good. They didn't look impressive. Then they're offering, well, it's like, oh, we're going to prep you for the show. Just like, oh, okay. So it's just
there's barely any barrier to entry for someone to be a coach, right? And that's the problem with it. And people, if they do one prep, they think they're qualified, but they know so little, they can't even really begin to have the whole system down for each and every person in every individual situation. And I think that's a really good comparison to the board game of Operation.
Yes, and that happens so much, and none of it changes. None of it's regulated. It's just people just trying to make a quick $100 a month, and it's just it's part of the sport. Unfortunately, is that and that's what I see a lot, is that someone that's very new to the sport, and they have poor experiences because you're working with someone that isn't experienced, and the high top level coaches, like the Cliff Wilsons and the Paul Revelia, who's like one of my favorite people. Those guys are so busy because they're working with so many people. Or like Scott Stevenson, he's great too. But it's just the prevalence of the great coaches versus, it's just like 1,000,000 to 1. So it's so hard to really team up with someone like that.
I definitely empower anyone looking for a coach to really do their research and just think about things critically before you decide. And you have so many options, as a consumer of bodybuilding right now, right? You don't need to go with your local coach, right? There's tons of people who do online coaching, and obviously there'll be some that are more qualified than others. And if you just do the research and watch what they post, you can get an idea of if they're a good thinker or if they're considering everything, or I think one red flag that sticks out to me is if they just post like this is the way it should be done, or without any sort of explanation or caveats to it. That's a major red flag to me. If someone just says this is the way you diet or this is the way you train, right? It doesn't educate anyone anything, right? So
absolutely. I always stray away from people that speak in absolutes like that. One thing too is that people need to consider too before doing a prep is that, if you're doing a prep, the best that you're probably going to feel in terms of your joints are going to be at the beginning of the prep. Then once you start to really wind down, your body takes the wear and you start to run into itises just from just being worn down. You should never start a prep without your body feeling everyone's 100% is going to be different, whether when you're 20, 25, 30, 40, 50, how my body feels. Like my body feels good now, but compared to when I felt when I was 20 years old, I could jump out of a plane and land on my feet back then and feel fine. Now it's like I walk down my steps and I miss one step and I blow my knee out. It's just like and that's why I have the approach that I do with my training, is that I want to make sure that I'm doing this for as long as I can. So
I really think before you start a contest prep, you need to be like financially, emotionally, physically sound. Everything needs to be good. If you get anything wrong that's going on in your life, it's probably going to get worse because of prep. It's almost certainly not going to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
So to round out the show, Eric, I'm kind of curious, what goals do you still have in natural bodybuilding? Because it seems like you've pretty much done it all, except for maybe win a world title. What are you trying to get out of your next few years of competing?
That's a good question. I felt that with my last series of shows, my goal with that was to do things that hadn't been done before by anyone in the US. And it was a big goal. And I doubted myself quite a bit during a lot of the process, because, it just was not easy. Especially the international shows they were difficult. And they required a lot of preparation. But, I had high expectations, and I felt that within my limitations as a natural athlete, I did well. I feel that, with every show that you do, the journeys, the end goal is always the same. Like you want to be your best. But I feel that with what I want to do now, I don't know. I ask myself that a bit. I am confident that I can improve on my past condition, but maybe how I feel about accomplishing what I do with those shows will be maybe understood in that moment, not now. I love coaching people. I love bodybuilding, and I've always, when I was doing all as a natural competitor competing in the Arnolds, I hope that what I was doing would inspire other people to do things that were very hard to do as a natural athlete. A lot of the time I wonder if, I had accomplished that. What's difficult within bodybuilding is that, you have two sides. There's not it's not like it is, there's the Major League Baseball, and there's the NBA, and there's football. There's one league. There with bodybuilding, there's obviously two different leagues. And when you cross over to the IFBB, people, and I'm sure certain people are like, well, Eric's doing IFBB, Eric's on drugs. I don't really care about that. If I cared about what people thought, I would have stopped doing this 15 years ago. But for me, it was in my mind at that time and now, just something very difficult that I wanted to do. And I really wanted to push the limits as a natural athlete. If I can get to something close to that this time, possibly, maybe winning the Natural Olympia, if I just, now I just want to be a positive influence and ambassador for the sport. I love helping people succeed. I love helping people, I love helping people be pain-free, moving pain-free. And, people that had no expectations competing, doing well at shows. Those are the things now that really make me happy when it comes to bodybuilding.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to following your season. You've been one of the people I've probably been following some of the longest in the sport. So it's always nice for me to see you pop back up and, reemerge on that stage. Before we sign off, though, if someone wants to get in contact with you for coaching or just, pick your brain on some things, what's the best way to contact you?
You can contact me on Instagram, and that's the Irontron. Unfortunately, my Facebook page was hacked, which sucks. So I lost everything. I have a new Facebook, which there's like 200 friends, which is awesome, and so I lost all that, unfortunately. But you can get contact with me through Instagram, or you just email me, and it's eric@scottstrength.com. So either that or the email works.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Eric, for coming on the show. And I'm looking forward to following your progress this season.
All right. Thank you, Connor.
Thanks.